Victoria Derbyshire's interview with Naftali Bennett this morning was, in many ways, a disaster. On the one hand, he is quite right, it was biased. And on the other hand, she failed to ask all the right questions, all the interesting questions. She had in front of her one of the arch nationalists, one of the ultra nationalists, apparently more right wing than Netanyahu. And she failed to hold him to task for his views at all. Instead, she came across as biased and as ill-prepared. It's extraordinary, given the fact that she was reading from a script. Quite extraordinary. Let's have a look at the interview, and I'll interrupt where it seems appropriate.
Good morning to you.
Good morning.
I wonder if you can tell us where you think Israel is right now with the imminent ground invasion.
Well, our objective is for the citizens of Israel to be able to return to their homes in the south and to have the hostages released. That's our goal. And we want to be able to live with security and peace. The families here in the town of Sderot and tens of thousands of other families to know that never again will they be under rockets, terror attacks, etc. from Gaza. The implication of that is that we need to demilitarize Gaza. And that's the stated goal of the government.
Okay. Well,
So we are planning a counteroffensive against this Hamas, ISIS type organization.
At this moment, she should have taken him to task for the vagueness of the goal. And she should also have pointed out that in 2013, he allegedly said, I'm going to quote, "I already killed lots of Arabs in my life, and there's absolutely no problem with that." He said that Palestinian terrorists should be shot. This is summary justice. Now, is this the right way for a nation to behave? And that's the question she should have been ready to ask. Instead, she moved on to a vague question about the whether this policy is going to ensure the release of the hostages. A reasonable question, but not the right one at this particular point. She should have held him to account for what apparently he has said in the past.
So we saw 2 US hostages released, and I wonder, does a ground incursion into Gaza make it less likely you will get the rest of the hostages out?
Well, there's no option but to eradicate Hamas. And if anyone has a better idea how to eradicate this Hamas, ISIS, let me know. But
do you? What I'm asking you is, does it make it harder to get the hostages out?
He gave her an opportunity there to ask the key question. We understand the problem. The solution by Netanyahu may not be the best solution. Is it right to attack, to lay siege to an entire area?
The hostages is one of the objectives. The other objective is to eradicate Hamas, so this sort of thing can never happen again.
Eradicate Hamas, breed such resentment, another Hamas, another organization will grow in its place. Surely, have you not read the story of Hercules and the Hydra?
We thought that we can contain and live side by side with this Hamas state. That was a mistake across the board, and we're going to fix it.
Writing in the British press this morning, the UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak says Palestinian people in Gaza are suffering terribly at the moment. Our Foreign Secretary says that the 20 aid trucks that went in to Gaza from Egypt was a good start. Will more aid be allowed in?
Look, the world can come and help the Gazans. That's none of our business. Our business, and the Israeli government is allowing that sort of aid in. But my approach is humanitarian for humanitarian. It has to be reciprocal. And we right now have hundreds of Israeli citizens, including 5-month-old babies, held hostage. So if we're focused on humanitarian, it has to be reciprocal.
This is the man who espoused the idea of annexing 60% of the West Bank. This is the man who, as I said, allegedly had a policy of shoot to kill Palestinians. Why is the interviewer not pressing him on this?
And I would tie the two.
I understand that, but it is your business, isn't it? Because you have to clearly demonstrate that your fight is with Hamas and not with the Palestinian people.
So what is your question?
You said it wasn't your business, the humanitarian situation of Gazans.
No, we are not responsible for Gaza, just like you're not responsible for France. If others want to take care of the Gazans, that's theirs to do. They got a full-blown Palestinian Gazan state in 2005.
But
we handed over the entire. Hold on, we handed over the entire area. We pulled out our soldiers. We expelled the Jews living in Gaza and gave it to Mahmoud Abbas. And there was no siege or anything. The problem is that from days after that, they started shooting rockets at us.
But you do control the borders. You do control the borders. And so cutting off water, food, fuel affects all Gazans, not just Hamas.
Let me be clear now. We have an ISIS state next to us, okay? And, you know, this ISIS state, we are experienced in terror. Yes, we were surprised, but we will win. But the West is next. You know, if you think that it's not going to hit London, you're mistaken. It will. Radical Islam terror will hit everywhere. We saw ISIS kill a couple of fans in Brussels just a few days ago. You're next. So we're fighting a war that ultimately needs to and will defend the rest of the world from radical Islam.
I understand that.
Now,
I understand that.
We're focused, and here's what we're doing on the humanitarian side. We have told all the Gazans from northern Gaza to move to the south before we take action there, because our goal is for Gazan civilians not to die. We deliberately go out of our way to prevent that from happening as far as we can. The problem is that Hamas, ISIS, is using them as human shields.
Right.
Our big lesson is that we're going to defend ourselves.
Sure, I understand that, and I hear your words very, very clearly.
Surely now is the time to confront Naftali Bennett with his lawnmower doctrine, which is to hunt down all Hamas throughout Gaza. He's got his wish, hasn't he? This is the point, to question him directly. But she doesn't do it.
You will know that the head of the UN and many others have said wars have rules. And forgive me if I quote some of the Geneva Convention to you. Article 43, basic rule. The parties to the conflict shall confine their operations to the destruction or weakening of the military resources of the adversary, and shall make a distinction between the civilian population and combatants, and between civilian objects and military objectives. So
That's exactly what we're doing. That's exactly why we are allowing the civilians to evacuate before pounding them. We're doing the opposite.
It's not exactly what you're doing.
No, wait, you asked the question. Would you let me answer?
Go ahead.
What Hamas, ISIS did is they entered roughly 30 communities. Whenever they can, they butchered babies. They burnt them alive. They pulled a baby out of pregnant moms and then beheaded the baby, beheaded the mom. They raped young girls. This is what we're dealing with. And with all due respect, I think that Geneva Conventions, first and foremost, tell a country, you need to defend yourself. And we will defend ourselves. We're going out of our way. I know that last week a hospital was fired by Islamic Jihad that fired a rocket on it, and BBC said that it was Israel, but it wasn't Israel. And I understand that BBC has taken a side of on the Gazan side, because all your questions are only about the Gazan civilians.
That's not
true. You haven't asked one question.
That's not
true. You haven't asked one question about those children. From the very beginning of this interview, you just are asking me about them.
Mr.
But
Bennett,
it seems
that
you
is
cared
not true.
little about our side. Oh, it is.
Mr. Bennett, I began by talking about the hostages.
And this is the point at which the interview switches. And Naftali Bennett is quite right. The BBC shows its bias and more than that, The interviewer is more concerned with protecting her own reputation at this point than driving home a really solid interview. There are so many things she misses, and now it's his interview. And actually, if you want to see an example of how to squash the BBC, this is it, by the way.
And what I'm asking you about now is...
No, I'm not talking about the hostages. I'm talking about the babies that were murdered. And you keep on caring only about one side, but that is the BBC way. But let me tell you something. We're here protecting you. We don't need your protection. And if you think there's a balance here between two equal sides, then you are lacking moral clarity. And BBC, I must say, is lacking moral clarity. What you guys did last week, shame on you.
Before we spoke to you, Mr. Bennett, I spoke to a veteran Palestinian politician, and I asked her about the massacre of Israeli citizens in southern Israel. I want to ask you now about the long-term strategy. Who runs Gaza? Let's say the Israeli military manages to wipe out Hamas. Who runs Gaza the day after?
Well, I assume they'll develop civilian leadership based on the localities and on the Gazans themselves, but it won't be Hamas.
Right. What about what Joe Biden said last week, which is, of course, Israel has the right to defend itself, but do not make the mistakes that the UK made after 9/11? What do you think he means by that?
Well, I don't know. You'd need to ask him. What I know is that our big mistake is that for 20 years, we have again and again listened to the world. We've always contained this. We never went out to eradicate Hamas. That was the biggest mistake we made.
And that's the rest of the world's... Was that the rest of the world's fault then, rather than...
No, it's our fault. It's our fault. It's only Israel's fault. Though the world back then and now is basically telling us, cool down, let's go for a ceasefire. So our big mistake is that we listen to the world. I'm not blaming the world. The world has always been hypocritic about the Jewish state. I'm blaming us for listening to them, because at the end of the day, we have to protect ourselves. And, you know, I assume you wouldn't want ISIS to live in your neighborhood, and you would demand that your government eradicate ISIS. That's what our people want to, and we're going to do that.
At some point, will Israeli politicians have to sit down with Palestinian politicians to talk about the long term?
So there you see, that's what protecting our borders means. I'm sure Suella Braverman is listening to this, because this is the most extraordinary rant. He has destroyed the BBC completely. She was left-footed from the very beginning and was ill-prepared for this interview. And it's his, but it is frightening at the same time. Frightening. And there were so many questions to ask, and she doesn't get in any of them because she's so focused on her own bias and protecting her own pad. Oh, it's maddening. But let's get to the end.
Look, when I'm fine with any talks always, but the truth is, unfortunately, that Hamas enjoys massive public Palestinian support. That's the sad truth that we sort of like to.
Well, we don't know that. We actually don't know that.
We actually do.
The last
you know
elections.
Let me give you.
The last elections were in 2006.
Yeah, and you know that Hamas got a full majority, an overwhelming majority of the electorates.
It was a decade and a half ago.
I'm fine. Go and do elections. I can tell you that right.
Apologies. I do apologise. I'm not sure why the signal cut out at the end.